Welcome to the Psychology of Leading Without a Map, a two-part integrated series. This is not a series about predicting the future, it's about staying human inside it. Today's operating context is shaped by geopolitical realignment, rapid technological acceleration, economic volatility, workforce disruption, and so on. The leaders who will thrive are not those who try to control the storm, but those who can stand and surf calmly on the seas of uncertainty. Part A: No map, future shifts, dips, and disruptions. This part explores what is fundamentally shifting, why old models are breaking down, and how unpredictability is becoming the new normal. We examine how identity, purpose, and leadership itself must evolve. The psychology of leading without a map, in my opinion, first of all, the leadership model, they are also changing because previously leadership means like whatever is kind of going on, you kind of built on top of that, thinking about something which can happen or stuff like that. So that whole model kind of broke. Humanity's in a place where they are a bit confused that what is their career will be or what is their purpose will be in this complicated world. First, Rohit, I would like to ask you, what are the fundamentals you think is shifting beneath the surface?
I think some of the fundamentals that are really shifting right now in our world are things that have actually been shifting for some time, but we really haven't paid enough attention to them as being different to the past. So the geopolitical shifts that we're seeing now are really quite massive in terms of new alliances being formed or different political groupings, like what's happening with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the number of countries aligning around China, like the alliances between China, India, and Russia, where power and influence is shifting. The second is we've got along for a long time with a lot of countries being effectively weak and failing nations. They've had bailouts, they've had money from the US, from the IMF, from other sources to keep them going. But now the US has changed its policy. It's not doing so much aid, it's not giving so much money. And these countries are really on the brink. And so we now see that kind of volatility in global markets. And then I think the big one is technology. Technology has been moving fast and we've been struggling to keep pace. And now artificial intelligence has come along. It's starting to have a big impact, not necessarily in big businesses, certainly in small businesses and a lot of organizations laying off employees in anticipation of what AI might do for them. But that's a sign of organizations really struggling with new technologies. The fact that they haven't fully grasped AI is really a challenge that we see across the board with businesses that for the last few years, they've really struggled to understand how to deliver change. They were designed for a world of predictability, of stability. They were stability seeking organizations. And the leadership model really didn't work anymore, even 10 years ago. But it's taken this long to realize how poor it is. And that's why we see, for example, common figures of 70% plus of organizational transformation projects failing, and now 95% in the case of AI. And it's because we don't really know how to navigate a world that isn't certain, is volatile, is fast changing, and is incredibly complex and only getting more complex. And in particular, we don't have the management tools to be able to deal with that because we don't personally understand how to navigate those things. So it's very hard. If we can't do it personally, it's really hard for us to find a way of doing that for the organization. And I think there's still this sense that someday it will all get stable. Someday it will all come back and we'll be okay. And it's very hard for people who've gone through 40 years of behaving or being managed by and becoming managers and leaders in that old model. It's really hard to know how to shift. The old 10-point plans, 7-point strategies just don't work anymore. And we also don't understand that our organizations are becoming really experimental organizations. We're increasingly a portfolio of projects. And if you look at the effort that leadership puts in, very little of it really is about running the day-to-day operation. Increasingly, it's about all the change initiatives. But we don't really look at it and say, yeah, it's a portfolio of initiatives and some might fail. And so we don't take an experimental approach. We don't say, well, what are the stage gates where we look at these projects and decide very early whether they go, no go. We keep going with a lot of things, even though they're very clear signs that they're not going to work. And history repeats its old conceits. We keep doing the same things over and over again and hoping that we'll get different outcomes. And organizations just aren't very good at starting projects. They do a lot of talking, but they don't really do very clear definitions of exactly what they're trying to do, exactly who the owner of that project is, and exactly who has responsibility for managing the delivery. And they don't deal with all the internecine issues across the organization first that they know are going to come up. They try to deal with them during the project, which just delays it, causes chaos. And it's a very common set of features that we see time and time again. And that's part of the model being broken because we're not really trained how to do that as leaders. We're not trained to be good in experimentation. We're not trained to become a ready for anything organization capable of dealing with multiple scenarios.
Right. So, as you are talking about this stability and predictability, what I have seen, Kapil, is one of the personality trait conscientious people, they kind of run this organizational show for last 20, 30 years maybe. Okay, we talked about the creative people, we talked about the innovators and all these things, but they are not the front runner, so to speak. This openness personality trait kind of always sit back in the corporate structure. With AI and all this shifting, do you reckon or how you see this these creative leaders or these innovators or this openness personality people are coming in front? Is it happening or how this shift is happening?
The way I look at it, what's changing is, and as Rohit said, I think the world is becoming more and more unpredictable. And one of the things that we are not trained in life, in any sphere of life, whether you call it personal, education, or corporate, is how to thrive in uncertainty, how to thrive when things are going out of control. How can we actually relax and build something, as surf the waves, as we say in the ocean, because we are trained to look at things, to try and control things, to try and get to a level of certainty in whatever we are doing. And increasingly, as Rohit says about the geopolitical environment, technology, AI, the way and the speed at which things are changing, those models to get to a level of certainty is shifting very quickly as well. So when we talk about conscientious people or creative people, I think creative people are probably more attuned to uncertainty. Um, Having said that, they might not be the best leader in terms of creating structure. So we find ourselves in a place where how do we not only find stability in a space which is very unstable? How do we stand up and learn to surf in an environment that is continuously shifting? We call it like there's a rapidly changing reality that's happening in our world. And as the reality changes every few days, like if you look at where technology is moving, let's just say AI, for instance, every few days we're seeing step change. There was a stat I was reading the other day that in 2025, Y Combinator, 95% of the companies, 25% or more of what they were doing was involvement of AI. And the way things are shifting in that landscape, job market, the impact it's already having, and we don't know what will happen by the end of 2026. let alone 5 years, 10 years. Rohit's job has been very much looking at the future, 5, 10, 20, 25 years, maybe even longer. But it's becoming so hard to predict how fast things will change. So when we look at that, our business leaders, our organizations really clued up to thrive in that changing environment. So I think what Roy's talking about in terms of experimental organization, how can we really look at things, take the inputs, and as they change, have the personnel in the company be tuned into it and be trained in such a way that we can dynamically respond and not continuously react to things. And responsiveness needs from every individual, it needs a relaxation from what we call our identity that we've defined. It needs a certain embodiment. It needs a certain regulation of our emotion. That happens at an individual level, but then how do we then train the organization to be more like that? So that as an organism, we can move together in cohesion. And I think that's the world we're moving towards. Because, looking at it the other way, from all the things that I've read and heard, from a cognitive perspective, I think from an intellect perspective, where technology and AI is moving is that it's going to be more powerful than potentially the whole collective. And if that is the case, then we've been really focusing on the intellect, human intellect as the driver, the IQ, and not really at the thing that makes us human, which is our emotions, our EQ. So I think we've been talking about this for a while, for quite a few years, but I think right now where we are at, it's really coming to forefront. That is how I think the next chapter, next shift, the leadership has to go into.
As we know, like life expectancy increasing, okay, with technology, with medicine, and all these things, work life shrinking, okay. In one span, uh, I was reading somewhere that our dads generation, they do two or three jobs in the whole lifespan, and now Gen Z's already, they will do 7 to 9 jobs throughout their lifespan. So multiple skills in one lifetime is also necessary. So Rohit, how organization will define career, so to speak, or how organization will train their individual with this rapid change? I mean, what happened to Nokia? No one could believe, I mean, 10, 15 years ago. But now that type of thing probably will come in a more rapid speed. How you seeing it, Rohit?
I think when you ask about what could happen to organizations and people in terms of organizational structure, the jobs they have, the roles they have, and for individuals, the careers they have, as Kapil said, it's very hard to know exactly what might happen when we get artificial intelligence that's as smart as us or smarter, so-called artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence. Everyone has their theories, and organizations are struggling really to think about that design for that kind of world. So right now, what's happening is you're seeing this gradual split happening between, if you like, the core of the organization, the managers, the leaders, the change agents who are likely to be more permanent and are there to really steer the ship and set direction and course correct when necessary. And the poor people fulfilling a lot of the roles, even operational roles, increasingly there's this sense that we can either outsource that or we can bring in people on temporary contracts or short-term contracts where we're not necessarily training them in basic skills like communication or project management or innovation. We're expecting them to come in with those skills themselves. We will train them in the work of the organization and the work of the role they're doing. And what you're then seeing is that people are just faced with opportunities that are only a 12-month or 24-month fixed contract. So that idea that you might have 7 to 9 careers, well, it's more likely that you'll have little portfolios where you'll be an account manager in 3 or 4 different organizations over a period of 8 to 10 years, and then you'll move to a different career. Maybe you'll then move to working in special projects for a period of time, and then you might work with some technology management roles. You can see that kind of shift, and we might even see people flipping between the two, because increasingly every job requires us to be heavily involved in projects, requires us to be thinking about how we want to use the technology to best effect. So I think we could see people having 30 jobs in a 50-year time frame, and maybe, as you say, 8 to 10 careers. Organizations aren't really geared up right now for how to truly manage that workforce that is contingent workforce that's brought in project by project or for a period of time to work in the operations area. And we're beginning again with trying to find the new model of leadership that says, how do we lead an organization where 70, 80, 90% of our staff are coming in on project basis or are outsourced? We haven't yet worked that out. Most organizations haven't yet worked that out. In some cases, you see people who are effectively holding companies. The center is very small, and then they own lots of other companies, and they know how to manage that. But what they don't know is how to manage their organizations as thousands or tens of thousands of individual workers who are their own bosses, but coming into work for us for a period of time. And individuals certainly aren't geared up to that. Again, we as individuals are stability-seeking beings. And so the vast majority of the population today is still focused on the idea of getting a job and having tenure for a certain period of time. They're not in that mindset of being self-employed, managing their own career, setting their own direction, ensuring they're having the right training. The good thing, I guess, is that the internet has many, many vehicles through which we can train and learn new skills, and we don't have to wait for the corporation to tell us when we can learn these things or to earn the right to have that training. We can take responsibility for developing our own skill sets. Almost daily, we can choose different courses. We can, in an afternoon, learn the basics of project management, take a 6 hour course in an afternoon, and suddenly we've got some understanding of how to perform the roles. What it doesn't give us is the experience of doing that. So there's going to be some challenges around how we manage this, how we organize ourselves, and how we make sure that we are really thinking about the design model, how you maintain the culture of an organization, how you create a culture that's receptive to people who are going to be coming in for a very short period of time and then handing over the baton to someone else, and how you create a culture that unifies people, and how you maintain this sort of model that Kapil was talking about. It's a very fluid and flexible organization that can stand comfortably in uncertainty and not panic every time something happens. And that becomes harder and harder when people haven't worked with you for very long and don't understand that that's your model. So I think that gearing up now for the fact that the majority of our workforce could be contingent, coming in as needed, and that we as organizations are going to have to find a way of communicating strategy, communicating our history, communicating our culture, and getting high performance out of that kind of organization, I think, is the organizational challenge. And for the individuals, it's learning how to manage yourself. It's learning how to enhance your own capabilities on a continuous basis. And it's learning, again, how to be comfortable in uncertainty so that you might have 30 jobs in a 50-year time frame.
In this current structure or like a previous structure, if you don't know anything, it's kind of a weakness, okay? And especially collective society people, we are not very good in saying, no to something. But always not knowing can open up many doors, or you can be in that inquisitive mode to learn something new. I mean, as self-employed, three of us, we know that, we have to do sales, we have to do operations, we have to do many things together, and not necessarily we have skills in every department, but we have to chin up and do that. Kapil, do you think that not knowing from that from this weakness, it's kind of becoming a strength in this coming time?
It has to be. And it goes really deep, this idea of not knowing. I think, especially at a cultural level, we live in a very production oriented culture, in that I think performance and achievement is very connected to the idea of knowing. And um, our self worth is quite often defined by how much we know. So if I'm talking to someone and come across as I don't know, then somehow it straight away gets connected to how worthy I am and what my value is. We have this saying quite often, especially with men, that you ask us a question and we will come up with something. We don't want to be seen as not knowing something, especially in our relationships. If you ask, you know, like if my wife asks me a question about rocket science, I have no idea what it is about, but I'll try and figure it out because my self-worth is defined by this idea that I need to be able to know to define my value and my self-worth. And I think at an individual level that exists, but when we start to look at it from a collective level, whether in an organization or in social scenarios, that is where we have to redefine this idea that not knowing is okay. Not just not is okay, it's actually the thing that helps us learn more, to helps us expand our boundaries, expand. That is where growth is. We often say that the growth is at the edge of our comfort zone. So we need to learn intrinsically this idea that not knowing is good, that it's okay to be uncertain, that not only okay, but we can actually thrive in that uncertainty. And we have to find this, in Buddhism, there's this idea of middle path where paradox can coexist. The idea that we want to have certainty in life so that we can have a bit more control, or at least feel like we have a bit more control in life, and knowing that most things are uncertain and unknown. How do we find a middle path with those two seemingly paradoxical things is where we are headed. So in some ways, AI is taking us more on a spiritual path individually.
So the last question to you, both of you, it's the same question, which is, we know typically anywhere in the world, government and the processes in the government, there are a lot of red tapeism. They move very slowly. How they will cope up, or will there be any government anymore down the line, Rohit?
Very interesting question about how governments deal with the emerging future and the volatility that involves. I think historically we've needed governments to actually move slowly. We don't want governments to be erratic and constantly changing everything because, as Kapil said, we want some stability in our lives. We want government to provide that. We don't want them to keep changing the model of the health service. So if I go to my doctor this morning, it's free. And if I go tomorrow, I have to pay for it. And if I go the next day, it's 50-50 payment, half government, half me. We don't want that. We want some stability around which we can plan our lives. And so much as we may not like it, that government takes a while to respond to everything, there's a benefit to that as well, in that there's some predictability to it. We know the government is going to make considered choices, even if we don't like the choices it makes. It's very rarely going to make totally rash decisions, although we're seeing some of that now in the face of everything that's going on. Organizations, again, as Kapil and I have both said, the people in them are what needs to change in a sense. They need to start developing that comfort of living in uncertainty and being comfortable with it. But also they need to develop some core skills in their people so they can adapt more rapidly. And we talk about four key things there. One is the ability to learn and learn fast and continuously. So we're abreast of what's changing, and we're understanding the ideas of what others are doing to cope. Secondly, that ability to innovate, having a common language in the organization. So we all know some certain tools and techniques to move innovation projects forward, and we have a common language around that. The third is foresight, that willingness to look outside and see what might be coming next and think about what impacts that might have, and how we can do the right kind of experiments to test how we might respond. And the fourth is that transformational thinking piece that says we have to be comfortable with the idea of looking at a process, looking at a way of doing things, and be willing to completely turn it upside down or eliminate it because there are better ways of delivering the outcome. And that's all training. That's all. Organizations are basically large sets of individuals acting in their own best interest, but also trying to move the organization forward. So for government, I think that's the challenge, and maybe splitting out the day-to-day running of government versus the long-term planning. We don't want constant changes in infrastructure for energy, for roads and things. We don't necessarily want constant changes in our health system, in our policing and security, but there's an awful lot of other things where we want governments to move faster. So it's getting governments to understand that and getting a population to understand that maybe they're voting once every 10 years, community that's managing infrastructure and planning infrastructure, and maybe now every 2 or 3 years for those who are managing the day-to-day, that which we would currently consider to be government.
Kapil, how are you seeing it?
Uh, I think I'll leave the more futuristic aspects to Rohit from the government perspective. What I feel we're moving towards, I would like to see more people who are self-aware at every in every aspect of our lives, whether it's corporate, organizational, government. And I think we will be forced to do that going forward as we are forced to look at more of our humanness. And more of our humanness comes from, um, I believe, a lot of like our feelings, our emotions, our sensitivity, the sensations that make us like that. This body is what makes us human, you know. And I think we quite often live in a world where we're very disconnected from our emotions and feelings. As we move towards a world which is probably going to be technology led, but not by us, probably, we have to develop, for a better word, emotional intelligence. What that means is we have to become more self aware. We have to cultivate empathy. We have to uh, learn to not be reactive but responsive. And that happens when we learn to regulate our emotions better. We have to develop social awareness. And as we develop those things, I think we show up in a different way with each other, whether it's communication, whether it's how much impact we have on the world around us. And when we do that, I think in the work that I do, I feel that when an individual goes through a change, we have a ripple effect. So anytime we talk to anyone, anytime we connect to anyone, our ideas cause that kind of ripple effect. So when we go through this internal change, I think that'll have a ripple effect across all spheres, all domains of our life. And I think it will have an impact on how the government and the politics is run as well. I mean, I would love to see more socially sort of self-aware politicians, more politicians who are way more empathetic to each other and everyone. And I think if we have that, I think our political environment and how the governments are formed will be completely different anyway.
Nice. So, on that, in our next episode, we will talk about what kind of practices a human being or an organization can do to navigate this journey a bit smoother. Thank you, guys.